although this fear exists in me, this fear is also trying to tell me something. And this fear is trying to tell me that we need to make a change. And so, even in a marginalized body, I have a position of power that will allow for me to speak up. And so now I need to, and now I'm going to. Oh, hello, Lane.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
God. You and I talked a little bit about like trying to more intentionally sort of like bring into the podcast what's going on in the world right now while also being cognizant that by the time this comes out, there may be a different thing that we're sort of like grappling with at the time. But this week in particular, what is this, the third week of January when we're recording this, has been weird energy this week, so I'm kind of, like, trepidatious.
For sure. Yeah, it has been a crazy week for sure.
Yeah, how about you? How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I've been really busy, but with all good things. So yeah, that's great, but there is certainly an energy in the air.
Yeah, what I was talking to a friend about earlier today was, like, it feels so weird to be trying to, like, build a business and to be a therapist in, like, a crumbling democracy, when, like, nothing outside seems to be working right, but we're all just kind of, like, still responding to emails as if it's a normal time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a therapist yet, but I work with a lot of them, and I definitely relate to that. It feels confounding to be kind of bogged down in the admin of things when
Right.
everything else is kind of on fire. So,
Yeah. Right? But what is not bogged down, what a great segue,
mhm.
is my conversation with Poonam,
Yes,
who we're gonna talk about
absolutely.
today.
Yes,
Yeah.
we are.
So I just wanted to say before I hear from you what you thought about the episode, I have gotten to spend a decent amount of time with Poonam and her business partner, Julianne. And Julianne's episode came out, I think, in November. It came out in the fall.
Mhm.
And I don't remember why. We recorded them around the same time. I don't remember why they came out. It's, such different times, but they are the 2 of them, and, like, especially after listening to this with Poonam, it's just such a gift to connect with people who, like, really at the deepest level, like, have a shared way of wanting to move through the world, and I have felt such a deep partnership with them, even though I haven't gotten to talk to them even since the new year started, but it's so lovely to have their connection, and I just also wanted to give a shout out to Lee Matthews, who introduced us. Lee was in my Authentic Leaders group and was also in their program. I also wanted to give a shout out because they are working with, the Head Heart Leaders team right now, and I just keep hearing amazing things from that. So, like, I could not be a bigger fan of Level Up Leaders with Poonam and Julianne.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems like a really cool thing that they have going on for sure.
Yeah. What stood out for you in this episode?
Yeah, so I know that you and Poonam talked a lot about individualism and collectivism, and both of your relationships with kind of that spectrum of things. Yeah, I found that aspect really interesting, and I was thinking of when you're brought up in one versus the other. I guess
Right,
I was brought up in, more of a individualist community. That's
right,
kind of an oxymoron, but,
right. Yeah, yeah.
and I think navigating to a middle ground or to the other side, trying to find something that
Mhm.
feels a little bit better can be a wild process. I kind of
Right,
think of it as like a pendulum swinging back and forth, and if you were raised, like, super individualistic, sometimes the pendulum swings too far and to the other
right.
side, and so I was thinking about that and, just my own navigation to finding a way to connect with what's around me and who's around me,
Yeah.
in a way that feels better and different from what I've previously experienced. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
good. I love to hear that. And like what you're saying is such an echo of what this podcast is all about, of like listening to a conversation with people who have a certain way of thinking and being and are, grappling with these things and then figuring out like how does that apply to me and what I have been moving through. And
Mhm.
then we also really kind of expand that into what does this look like organizationally for leaders? So anybody who's thinking about doing some sort of leadership training, this is a good primer for both my Authentic Leaders program and for Level Up Leaders. Just sort of the vibe of the invitations that we're trying to create for leaders, because it's not about like changing who you are as a leader. I think it's really about tapping into that authentic use of self, in a way that can be generative and inspiring with others rather than like top down hierarchical and restrictive.
Yeah, absolutely, and also really tapping into fear when it shows up
Yeah.
and kind of learning how to channel that instead of letting it hold you back, I think, or restrict you.
Yeah, well, let's without further ado, Poonam Natha is a co-founder of Level Up Leaders Inc., and she aims to support group practice owners to cultivate psychological safety, values-aligned workplaces by stepping into their authentic leadership with clarity, compassion, and courage. And along with her co-founder Julianne Guinasso, their philosophy of trauma-informed leadership begins with honoring your own humanity so you can honor the humanity of your team. So please enjoy this lovely conversation with Poonam Natha. Hello, Poonam. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Yeah, we were just it's funny when we have like significant conversation before the podcast starts and then we have to sort of like pretend that we just said hello, but we've been talking for 10 minutes already. So that's where we are right now, folks.
Yep, exactly. We just connected on some really deep things.
Right? Exactly. Which I'm sure we'll unfold some of them today. Who knows? But would you like to tell people who you are and what you do first and foremost?
Absolutely. Yes. So I'm Poonam Natha. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. I am the eldest daughter of immigrant parents and a cycle breaker in both my professional and personal lives. I'm also the co founder of Level Up Leaders Inc., which is my passion. And alongside Julianne Guinasso, who's the other co founder, we get the privilege and honor of working with group practice owners to cultivate trauma informed, psychologically safe work cultures, which is really, truly a passion project of mine.
Yeah. And as I've told you before, but I'll say it again for listeners, you two have done the best job of like synthesizing what you do in a way that is so clear and so mwah. So
Mm,
good job.
thank you.
Yeah. Big fan. I want to know, well, okay, I'm going to bookmark cycle breaking because I want to hear more about that, but tell us your therapist origin story. Why did you
Mm.
get into the profession?
An AP psychology teacher in high school completely changed my trajectory. I wanted to be a pediatrician. I knew I wanted to work with kids for as long as I knew what a career was.
Aw.
And somewhere along the way, I took this psych class and I realized I was fascinated by human behavior. I was fascinated by people. And somewhere along the way, it also clicked that I was the person people came to for the things.
Mm.
I was the holder of secrets. I was the holder of space. I was the comfort. And it all just sort of connected. So I feel like a very beautiful story in that there was no second guessing what my career was going to be. I went into college with a psych major and it sort of just unfolded from there. I will say when I graduated from my undergrad, I had no idea what life was going to look like, but I had some really beautiful people guide me along the path. And I ended up in a grad program, ended up with a really beautiful practicum site working with children. And I stayed working with children for my career as a clinician and also as a supervisor for 15-ish years before I decided that I wanted to really focus on leadership exclusively outside of community mental health and outside of working directly with clients.
Hmm. Similarly, I had a sociology class my senior year in high school, and so and then I ended up taking a sociology class in undergrad that did not go well. So it's funny. It took me a little bit longer to get there. I'm glad you found it earlier. Do you want to give a shout out to that teacher?
Absolutely. Mr. Mike Bodine, if you are listening, maybe I will send this to you. If you are listening, you have changed my life.
That's so amazing. I mean, I should have more teachers on actually, because I do think teachers are absolutely healers. And when I think back on how I made it through my younger years, it was the teachers that saw me.
Absolutely. Yes. And I would say my teachers throughout my high school career, more so than college, really saw something in me and helped shape something for me because I also didn't have the resources at my
Yeah.
fingertips. My parents had no idea what to do. And so if it wasn't for those teachers who really took me under their wings, let me hang in their classrooms, gave me snacks, made sure I knew what I was doing for my essays, for college applications and helped along the way, I couldn't say that I would be here today.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I'm thinking of like the intersection of like first generation college goer in the family, and obviously it's a very different experience, but the same like our parents don't know how to navigate these
No.
systems. Like my mom told me to drop out of college cuz she didn't know what the FAFSA was and thought she would be able it's like shit like that unless you have
Mhm.
somebody who can really walk you through it, you and I wouldn't be sitting here.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yep. It's really special to have those people in your life. And I agree. Teachers are healers in really beautiful ways and don't get nearly enough credit.
Yeah. So, any teachers who are listening, make sure to send me an email because I probably want to have you on the podcast. Well, let's talk about cycle breaking since we
Mm.
sort of like went into the I'm guessing it has to do with being an immigrant child. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, tell me all about cycle breaking.
absolutely. Yeah. So cycle breaking is really interesting. And again, it shows up both in my personal and my professional life, I think.
Mm,
In my personal life, it's taking some of those unhealthy parts of my culture and family life and really bringing in something that's a little bit more healthier. So, taking the values that I've carried from my culture that are so beautiful to me, and then also taking the values and things that I've seen around me with the families I've been exposed to and the friends I've been exposed to, and creating a new way, if you will. So, as a daughter of Indian parents, one of the things is not talking about emotions. Uh, Funny, I'm in a career that all we do is talk about emotions and relationships.
yeah.
But we don't. We don't talk about emotions. We brush those under the rug. Also, there's stories and expectations around what it is to be a woman. And so it's a lot of cycle
Yeah.
breaking around that. So not only am I poking the bear within my family systems and getting people to say the things that are hard and real, I'm also, or at least at the time, paving a path for folks that didn't exist. I was in a love marriage. I did not do an arranged marriage. That was different. I went to school and got educated. My grandmother at some point told me once I got married that I didn't need to go to school anymore. That really the
Mm,
only reason I was going to school was so that it looked good on my bio data, so that somebody would marry me. But then once I got married,
mm,
my entire purpose was to produce children and then be a wife and be a mother and be a daughter in law. So cycle breaking in those arenas because I've also fully harnessed those roles in my life. And I am a caregiver and I am a mother and I'm a wife and I'm a daughter-in-law. And I do all of that while still holding on to my career. And then in my professional life, I think also breaking cycles because I've taken all the things that I've learned. Maybe at the time I rejected them within my culture and applied them in leadership. So when I ended up in leadership, there were things that I saw that just didn't sit right with me, and particularly around the ways in which we navigated community in the workplace and navigated work culture. And I grew up knowing and really feeling deeply that we all work together to accomplish a common goal. We all work together in the kitchen, we all gather, and that is the way cultures work. And that is the way there is beauty and richness. And so I think early in my career, without even intentionally understanding what I was doing, I started breaking those cycles too. And I really wanted to create family, if you will, within work. And
Yeah.
I know that gets a little interesting. People have feelings about saying work is family.
Yeah.
But I think that when we talk about roles and responsibilities, and when we talk about how, again, we all work together and how we all take on parts to support each other and show up for each other, it can function like a family.
Yeah. Okay, where do I want to go with this? Can we tease out some of the nuances of the cultural piece here? Because in like my anti-racist liberatory work, I'm trying to get to like the more finer nuances. And I think we have an opportunity to do that here because you and I have a relationship and I'm not just like, tell me about your culture, boop, boop, boop. But so because the United States is a very individualist culture,
Right?
Indian cultures are very collectivist. And
Correct.
on like, because I've struggled with this before. Because in my head, I'm like, yeah, well, if we had a more collectivist way of thinking about the world, we would be better. And then people who come from collectivist cultures are like, I do not want to be enmeshed anymore with the people in my family or in my work or whatever. So like, because you did use the word healthy and unhealthy. I don't know. I'm saying words. You are nodding your head. So just unpack what you where you want to go with this. You know where I'm going.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think everything's on a continuum of health to unhealth, right? And so even collectivism can be unhealthy
Yeah.
to a degree, and even individualism can be unhealthy to a degree. And
Right.
so I think for me, it was about marrying those two things and finding a happy middle,
Yeah.
if you will. And so, from the collectivistic sort of standpoint, I was trained to anticipate needs, and I was
Yeah.
trained to sort of just show up and be the person who filled in the gap, right? And
Yeah.
that could be really unhealthy at times because there could be a self-abandonment that comes along with that. On the flip side, there can be a lot of beauty with that because maybe you see somebody across from you and you notice that they're struggling today, and so you step in to support them and you show up for them, and that helps uplift them. And then there's the day when you're struggling and those people show up for you too. So
Right.
there's beauty in it, but there can
Right.
also be unhealth in it. And then similarly with the individualistic, right? If I'm thinking just about me, I have no consideration for the people around me, then I've lost sight of humanity. um, on the flip side, I need to take care of me, and I need to also engage in rest, and I need to engage in self care so that I can show up for my community and the people around me.
I guess I just want to share something that I've been peeling back the layers on recently. Because as we talk about this, so I just recently did a deep Enneagram dive, and I told you and Julianne about it.
Yeah.
Aphoria group. I'm gonna have somebody on from the podcast because it was just such a great experience. But as I was going through each Enneagram type, I started to realize that I have certain biases that my head doesn't own anymore. Like, I don't have the bias that fear is a bad thing, but there's something at a deeper layer of my core that was telling me I don't like Enneagram sixes because they're fearful, whiny babies. Which that's
Interesting.
ridiculous, right? And I would like, my brain would never say that, but there was something in a deeper layer that is, like, pushing that away, and so I hear that too in terms of, like, the collectivism because I came from a family with a lot of enmeshment, right? So, I became very self-reliant because I didn't want to be part of that system, and so as you're talking, I'm just feeling this deeper layer of myself that really resists that collectivist sort of ideal. While at the same time, I also really deeply hold that we are not going to get through this alone. Like the only way through this time is to get through it together. So I'm just highlighting that for anybody else who might be like grappling with the deeper layers of what some of these things really mean and what it means to confront that within yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important to pay attention to that wisdom that's happening within us internally. It's telling us something. I think that when we're not paying attention to ourselves, I think we resist things that can again, actually be beautiful. I use the word beautiful a lot. I think that we reject things that have value. And hmm, I don't actually know where I was going with that.
I don't care. I love what you said. Well, I'm curious since you're doing a lot of work in leadership, can we translate this to the work that you're doing with leaders?
Mhm. Absolutely. The part about the collectivism and the
Any of it.
individualism, any of it?
No, any
Absolutely.
of it. Wherever you want to take it. I'm very open here. I don't have an agenda, so wherever you go, it's going to be beautiful.
Yeah. So I think with leaders or in leadership, if I could offer a visual for myself, it's like, oh, you're the tribal leader. So you set the tone for your community, if you will. And that can be both dangerous and also it can be helpful. And I think it can be dangerous because a leader might take on too much responsibility, might take on too much ownership of what needs to happen, or maybe even too much control. And that can be problematic. And the way I translate my lived experiences and my beliefs and my values into leadership is, well, let's acknowledge and own that in a leadership position you are in a seat of power. That does exist. In a lot of ways you do set the tone for what is, and how do you invite people into this culture? So when we're talking about work cultures, how do you invite your folks into co-creating this vision? How do you collaborate with folks? So there is this collectivistic being that we're creating because it's its
Mhm,
own living, breathing ecosystem while not losing sight of what the values are here. How
mhm.
do we talk to people about how we want them to show up? How do we talk to people about roles and expectations? How do we talk to people about ways in which they contribute? And how do we show people and also help them see the ways in which their contributions matter? Whether somebody has the seat or the title of a leader or not, everybody has a voice that is important in the system. In a kitchen, whether you're the sous chef or the head chef, right? Your role is important.
Or
That
the
plate of food
dishwasher.
or the dishwasher, that
Mhm.
those plates of food are not getting out to people unless everybody does
Yep.
their part and unless everybody is communicating together. And so when we're talking about leadership, it's how do we take that? How do we
Mhm,
take those sort of analogies, if you will, about systems and apply them in our leadership or apply them in our work cultures? Because it is a system and no one person can do any part of it without the contributions of all the other people.
right. And this is one of the pieces where, I mean, I know we're on Conversations with a Wounded Healer, but I also do want to bring up Group Practice Revolution because I I want to empower employees to really be in their authentic power and knowing how to contribute to the community instead of just pushing against something that's maybe trying to support them and or I mean, there are terrible practice owners out there. You and I don't know them because they don't come work with us, but, there are, but there are so many good ones, and when we can get contributions from voices who are not in a leadership position, who can see things differently, right? Because the more power you have, the harder it is for you to see your impact. We just know that that is a fact. And so the people who are doing the day-to-day work, it's funny because my husband, his family owns rental properties. And I've always said when we have a friend that rents an apartment, we can better manage the apartment because they will tell us the things that need to be fixed instead of just like letting it go. And that's what we're asking of employees too, is like, we will spend the money to like help you do the thing that needs to be fixed and but unless we know and have like a constructive dialogue around it, we're not going to be able to collaborate together.
That's exactly it. And if I think about when I was a clinician, when I was an employee and walked into settings, I had well-intentioned leaders for the most part. Some that maybe not, but I did. And if I noticed a gap, it was my responsibility. I felt very strongly it was my responsibility to bring it to my supervisor's attention.
Mhm.
It was my responsibility to show how we could potentially fill the gap because they don't have the same perspective. And that's no shade to them, right? If I'm a clinician providing services and I'm a clinician who's needing resources and my supervisor isn't in those shoes, how can they potentially even see that? But now if I bring it to their attention, we can collaborate on something. Or if I have a particular energy around this in a passionate way, then perhaps that's something I can actually take on and it would fill my cup just as it
Right.
would support not just my supervisor, but my colleagues, right?
Right.
And then when I was in a leadership position, I really appreciated when people did that for me because there's no way
Yeah.
for me to see it all.
Right. And it's such an interesting time that we're in because when I think about the complaints that I hear from employees a lot and people with they're perceiving themselves as having no power or less power, right? Use of power says we all have power all the time. It's just we can be connected or disconnected from it. Um is oh my god, what was I just saying? This is perimenopause, folks, that we completely forget what we're saying. Where was I? What did I say?
We all have power.
Yeah, exploitation. That's where it was. Thank
Mm,
you. You helped me get back there. Okay. Because of the time that we're living in right now, there is so much distrust for all systems of authority.
yes.
You know, whether it's a police officer or it's somebody who's teaching a professor in your grad school or a practice owner or whoever it is, and I'm naming different things for different reasons, right? There are problems with the systems, no
Hmm.
question. And not every person who has authority is a terrible person. I think that's something that we've lost right now, and there's almost a knee-jerk expectation of exploitation that I see people coming to the conversation with, and I understand, I was just saying I'm kind of unpacking some of these things. I understand that not everybody wants collaboration, but for those of us who do, let's find each other, right? Like, that's why this podcast exists. That's why everything that you and Julianne are doing exists, because we are trying to gather people who do want to create revolutions through support and care and kindness. And that's not just fluffy shit. Like, we're talking about actual like revolution through and liberation through connection.
Yep, that's exactly it. And we don't do it alone and in silos. We do it in a community. We don't change
Mhm.
systems. We cannot change systems unless we've got groups of people coming together to talk about them and to address the issues. And it doesn't happen when you've got just people in power positions talking about it. It happens when we're doing it together, no matter where we are. And I agree. I mean, our lived experiences absolutely shape how we view authority and our relationship to authority. And I think we've lost sight of what it means to assume good intent and extend benefit of the doubt and get curious. I think we've lost curiosity in so many ways because there's so much fear. And I get it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
absolutely get it.
How have you moved through fear, right? Because you're in a marginalized body, right? So you could certainly be walking around the world, fearing exploitation at every corner. Like, was that something you ever had to grapple with? Like, how do you move with that as a person with that lived experience?
Hmm. Yeah, I've definitely had moments in my life where I've had to grapple with fear and what it is to live in this world. In that or very real situations
Hmm.
around the 9/11 attacks.
Ooh, I
That was
bet.
really difficult for me, and particularly because my family owned a hotel at the time, and so running the
Mm,
property was very challenging. I had people tell me, "Hey, don't come here. You can't. It's really dangerous for you right now." So, those are very real fears that I've lived with. Very real fears around other authority type situations with law enforcement that were very just real for me living in the communities I lived in. And so, I think there were times where I let that limit me, to be perfectly honest. And I
mm,
think there were times where I found myself even in my very first leadership position, I remember having a moment where I felt so strongly about something needing to be said for me to advocate for my team. And
mm,
my heart's racing, but I felt so strongly that this was so important. So I said the thing. I was shut down. It was not a good experience. And unfortunately in that moment I felt like I could not advocate anymore. And so there were
mm,
times where I let fear limit what I knew was important around how we serve our folks, how we care for our providers. And then I think at some point I realized, well, and it wasn't alone. It was certainly with Julianne by my side. It was certainly with other leaders by my side, where there was this realization of, if I don't say this, if I don't advocate, if I don't show up, then who will? And so
Yeah.
perhaps, although this fear exists in me, this fear is also trying to tell me something. And this fear is trying to tell me that we need to make a change. And so I have, even in a marginalized body, I have a position of power that will allow for me to speak up. And so now I need to, and now I'm going to.
And I'm guessing that fear was a really important part of the process.
It absolutely was. Without fear, I wouldn't have known to do that. Without fear, I wouldn't have something to examine. And it's interesting. I'm looking down at my desk because I have this card, and it just literally, like, it sits here forever. It says, "Instead of taking on the fear of others, I reflect love." And it's just a reminder that I don't have to give in to fear. I can drop that energy into my body and transform it.
Right. And again, like I think we're in a moment where, like, the words that you just said, somebody could be like, "Well, you're just spiritual bypassing when you say that."
Mm,
You're not. I know that you're not. And I th I I'm this is what I'm still, like, in process of trying to figure out how do we communicate the energy of what you just said, where you have moved through fear to
mm,
come to the other side instead of just,
mm,
either bypassing it or not counting the fear, right? Pretending that it's not there.
mhm, mhm,
How do we communicate that depth,
mm.
that process, that, like, it's like you communicated this tip of the iceberg, but the whole iceberg is underneath.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know that I know the answer to that. And I think I think an examination of fear alongside others supports the journey. I think an
Mm.
examination of what that fear is communicating to us with a trusted person helps us work through that. So it's not about ignoring the fear. It's not about setting it aside. It's about truly looking at that fear. What is that, you know? And this is be as micro as, like, why am I afraid of snakes, right? That is a fear. It's a very real fear. Let me tell you. Okay. Okay. Random tangential story, but let me tell you, and maybe this will help
Please.
us unpack it.
Yes.
I've come across snakes in my childhood and run away screaming. I came home from school one day. It's a very vivid memory. My mom and my brother, we were getting out of the car. We see a snake slithering into the house. Slam the door, jump in the car, and go across the street to a neighbor's. No joke. Came back
Oh
later
my
after
god.
my grandfather had handled the situation.
Oh my god. And
Fast
this is in
forward,
California?
this was in California. Fast forward, and I was at a museum yesterday with my kiddos, and they had live animals, and there were snakes there. And before, I couldn't even, right? I could not look at snakes. I could not be in the presence of snakes. I couldn't see them on TV. But I was watching these snakes, and I'm just, like, fascinated. I'm like, oh, look, they're moving, they're slithering, you know, they just exist. And it's really interesting because if I think about that, like, what was that process and what was that journey? And it was a deep examination at some point for me, right? There's snakes that were portrayed to me in Hinduism as part of my cultural upbringing, and they were meant to be feared, and they were scary.
Mm.
And so, part of that plays into that, right? Oh, well, why am I afraid? Well, what do they mean exactly? Is there a reason for me to be afraid of them? Do I have the tools or resources to navigate a situation if I do come across a snake again in the future? How can I settle into my body? And how does this fear serve and support me? When has this been a coping mechanism? When has this been a survival strategy? When has this been a survival strategy in my lifetime? When has it been a survival strategy in my ancestral history and my generational lifetime? And and now, does it serve me today? Does this support me and help me today? So a lot of examination, absolutely not spiritual bypassing.
Right. I love that you just did that. You made snakes into such a great metaphor. Well done. That's
Thanks.
extremely impressive on the fly. We'll also say you can be afraid of snakes if you want to. You don't have to unpack that. But Yes, I love this thought. Okay, and if I'm sort of okay, everything I'm doing right now, so I just had an astrology reading on Friday, and it's funny, I have a stellium in Aquarius. Pluto is at the beginning of Aquarius, so it's hitting my Mercury right now. It's gonna hit my Mars, and then it's gonna hit my Sun. So she was basically like, "You have 10 years of transformation." And what she said about the Pluto Mercury is essentially like, all I'm doing right now is thinking about how I'm thinking, and that's exactly right. So, all that to say, how do we use that to think about in groups if we wanna change systems? How do we do it? And what I heard you say, if I can simplify it a little bit, is there is an equal process of inner and relational work, right? There's the inner deep dive of where is this fear from? How has it served me? What can I learn from it? And then there's the connection with others, sort of like, you're safe here. I will make sure to take care of this snake for you, or whatever that is, right? Like, and that inner outer dance that we have to do and we have to be honest about, mostly honest with ourselves. I think a lot of what we're going through right now is because people are struggling to be honest with themselves.
Mhm. Yeah.
End of sentence. You go.
I agree. No, and I think if we take this and translate it into the workplace and translate it into work cultures, there is so much fear. Fear around, if I make this decision, what's the consequence?
Mhm,
Which again could be helpful, but might not
mhm.
be. And so it's worth that examination of, where is this fear coming from? We hear a lot of, a fear around accountability processes.
Yes.
And let's take this back to what we talked about with authority earlier, right? There's fear around accountability processes because of really harmful experiences with authority figures.
Yes.
Okay, well, absolutely. Understandable. This is a lived experience. Now, what do we do with that? How do we
What do
move
we do
through
with it?
it? Right? How do we get curious about what that fear is? How do we say, well, this isn't something I want to perpetuate. This is absolutely a fear. If I don't want to perpetuate that, what do I want to do differently? And again, how do we
Right.
harness curiosity here?
Right.
And I think curiosity, there is a saying, right, that says curiosity is the antidote to fear.
Yeah.
I think it's that. I think we have to get curious. And again, there's an internal process, like you said, and there's an external process. So, are we, as a group practice owner, let's say, or as a leader, who are your other peer support systems here? Who are the other leaders you're talking to about this? Who are you learning from? Who are you riffing about with these things so that you can unpack it a little bit? Because we don't do this in isolation. If you're a clinician and an employee and there's fear around authority, who do you talk to?
Right.
If I didn't talk to my colleagues, if I didn't talk to other clinicians, I wouldn't be able to unpack it. I wouldn't be connected to another perspective. I wouldn't be able to understand whether this is a pattern or whether this is my experience. And I think there's just
Yep.
something so important about, when fear comes to visit, talking to the people around us versus having to hold it by ourselves.
Right. And to piggyback on, I think accountability is a huge piece of how we move forward together, because I think with how cancel culture has gotten out of control, again, with this, like, I'm afraid of exploitation. And so instead of coming to you with a call in, I'm going to call you out and cancel you and put you over here. That doesn't create change. That just puts more people isolated in a box over there. If we had more examples of genuine accountability, self-accountability, right? When
Yeah.
people hold themselves accountable, it's funny, I realize this is something I most of the time, I hold myself accountable before anybody else can, because I don't wanna I don't wanna have that experience. Sometimes it breaks through and, like, other people get to me first, but, like, I mean, it's killed me in some points in my life to, like, be so judgmental of myself, but like, it's a process of love to be accountable to other people. That is service. I think of that as service, right? Like, it's funny, my husband and I talk about, because he is also an Enneagram 9, as I know you are, avoids conflict like the plague, all this sort of stuff. And I recognized at one point, because I am the more powerful one, just because of my constellation of how I show up in the world, I have to hold myself accountable to lifting him up,
Mm,
because I could very easily tear him down. I mean, and we joke about the things that he's terrible at because he's a 9. Um, he's terrible at, like, being assertive, right? And I could just tear him down for that, but instead, I'm like, okay, instead of forcing him to do the thing that I think he should do, I can empower him and be like, tell me more about that, right? Why is it hard? Why do you have fear, right? What is hard for you about confronting? Because like I help him with his staff, right? What's scary about confronting this employee? Like, how can you provide this accountability with love? And because I hold myself accountable to our relationship, I'm able to really help him thrive. And that's what I aim to do in all of my
Yep.
relationships, and especially being a leader in the community. I mean, and I'm not gonna be like, "Oh, I'm the only one doing that." A lot of people are doing that, but we don't see it a lot. It's more of
Right.
an internal process, or maybe even a quiet process, and for some, maybe even a shameful process.
Absolutely. And again, it's worth examination, right? What is my fear around accountability here? What's my fear around taking responsibility here? What am I afraid will happen if I do?
Right,
In what ways will this lead to me being vulnerable in a way that I'm not comfortable with? Or in
right.
leadership, right? If I take accountability for this, do I lose my identity? Do I lose respect? Does this make it difficult for my folks to show up for me? And I think it's actually quite the opposite.
Right.
Um, something common Julianne and I used to say often is I'm doing you a disservice when and that is a way that we held ourselves accountable because
Yeah.
I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't have this conversation with you. And yes, I have fear around a conversation, but I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't. I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't hear you. And so the way I'm going to hold myself accountable is to make space for you to share and give me feedback because it's important. Do I fear that? Does that feel a little vulnerable? Absolutely. And is it equally important? 1,000%.
Right. And I'm thinking about motivation. Like, what motivates you to offer the service that you wanna offer? And I know,
Mm,
like, that might be a really hard question to answer because I don't think I can answer it, but, like, what motivates you to be that version of yourself rather than the version who just stays with the fear and doesn't act?
yeah, it's a great question. I wish I would have had time to think about that actually before you even
Yeah.
asked it. I think there's a deeper tie to spirituality and purpose here, if you will.
Mm,
I know deep down I am on this earth because I'm meant to leave it a better place than when I found it. And I
mm,
deeply hold that and believe that. And I think that motivates me. I
yeah.
think it motivates, I think other motivating factors are probably things like seeing ways in which that wasn't offered to me or seeing ways in which I
Mm,
see other folks who don't receive that kind of service and wanting to provide that and pave a path for that.
mhm.
So I think it's just wanting to put some good into this world because it could be a pretty terrible place, and especially in current times, it feels really hard to live in. And I can either choose to cave to that or I can choose to do my part to add some good into the world. And I have, again, it's a privilege. It is a privilege to be in the home I live in. It is a privilege to live in the community I live in. It is a
Mhm.
privilege that I have resources. And so why wouldn't I do something? I don't know if that seems so flippant, but like, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just constantly thinking about, like, what gets in the way for other people, and I love that connection to your larger purpose, and I feel the same. I think I have a similar purpose, and that's probably why you and Julianne and I get along so well is because we 'Cause we've really embraced that and decided that, yes, this is how I'm gonna, like, live out my this lifetime. Um, yeah, I mean, this is totally another tangent, but I sometimes wonder if the next evolution of psychotherapy is gonna have to be more spiritual, because I
Mm,
do think there's something missing when we don't connect this to something larger, especially right now.
yeah. Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think this is when we talk about, if we go back to earlier in the conversation, collectivism or community, that's bigger, that's deeper, and it's
Right.
not this silo. And I agree. I think that we will need to consider whatever that spirituality looks like. And everybody's going to view that differently, and that's okay. But how do we
Mhm.
connect to that? And how do we connect to purpose? Simon Sinek, he's been somebody I've followed for years and years. And really, I think one of the things that helped me get to where I am is that it's what's your why?
Mhm.
And his conversations around finding that purpose, because once you know that as a leader, even that helps guide your vision forward.
Well, it feels like a natural evolution in the conversation to ask the very important question for this podcast. Do you consider yourself a healer?
Absolutely. Absolutely do. I think I thought about that actually coming in today. And at first I was like, well, I guess it depends on what your definition of a healer is.
Yes, it does.
And for me, a healer is somebody who supports someone else's well-being. And that's what I do. I do that as a therapist. I do that in my family. I do that for group practice owners and leaders alike. It's supporting and promoting well-being. Whatever that looks like, however that unfolds, that's what it is.
Mhm. And how does wounded healer strike you?
Wounded healer is interesting. I think that I know there's been some controversy around that term as well. And I think my lived experience and wounding that I've had in my lived experience offers wisdom. And that offers wisdom for myself internally, but I think it can also offer wisdom externally. And it's not to say I want to project those lived experiences onto others. However, it does create an opening for empathy, and it does create an opening for compassion, and it does create an opening to understand the person across from me. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I am a wounded healer. And do I want people to experience those same lived experiences? Absolutely not. But for
Mhm.
somebody who has maybe experienced wounding, I feel like it allows me to be able to support people.
I mean, if you haven't experienced wounding, then I don't know, call me and like let me know what you're doing because I don't know. I don't know. I guess when I studied trauma, I started just feeling like we're all traumatized. Who isn't traumatized in some way? Like I really the way that I guess again it's all about how you define things.
Yeah.
And the way that I define trauma basically like whenever you didn't get something you needed in the moment in the way that you needed it. And we've all had that experience.
We absolutely have.
Something that's totally random and an aside, but I think is super important, to unpack for people. As you were talking, I was thinking someone could be listening to this and going, "Sarah, what are you doing having your competition on this podcast?"
It's
And
not competition.
right? Like it only occurred to me when when you said we help group practice owners and that somebody else would think that because I've never thought that. Like
Mm,
I it, and I think about the difference between again like saying the words I don't believe in competition and really like embodying I don't believe in
yeah.
competition
Yeah.
because w- the more people who are doing this work, the more people we have that are creating environments that we want to work in and that we want to have families in and that we want
Yes.
to, do whatever in. So yeah, you want to talk about like your relationship with the word competition?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an Enneagram 9. I'm not a competitive person in some aspects, in a lot of aspects of my life. Get me on a board game, we'll have a different
Yeah,
conversation.
right.
In this work and in what we do, I agree with you. I think that we're not competitors because we are doing this together. We are pushing for something different in our industry, in our field, and in leadership.
Mhm.
And competition, it can serve us to maybe make us better. Like maybe there's some ways, Sarah, that I see you doing something. I'm like, oh, I want to do that, but I want to amplify it. So not
Yeah,
competition,
yeah,
amplification, right?
yeah.
Also, I think if we were to look at it as a competition, um, what we're not allowing for is different angles, right? So
Yeah.
we've said Enneagram a few times now. I'm a 9. Maybe somebody's going to relate to that way of viewing the
Mhm.
world and that perspective.
Yeah.
Um, And then there's going to be somebody who's going to look at a 3 and say, that's the way for me, actually. That voice is for me. And it doesn't discount the other. It means that we're just doing it from a different perspective and an angle. It's like a therapist, right? I'm going to go to this therapist to maybe do parts work because that's their specialty. And then maybe I'm going to go to another therapist to do some somatic experiencing because that's their specialty. And it's not a competition. It's that I'm going to look at my life from different angles and get different perspectives. And all of it is beautiful and all of it is lovely and all of it serves us. Um, but if we're looking at it as a competition, I think we're limiting ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think too, I definitely have moments where maybe I see somebody doing something similar and it's on Facebook and I have that like twinge of like, oh, they're doing it better than me or, they're going to get this thing and I'm not going to get it. But like I just continue to remind myself and I really do truly believe there is enough for all of us. And a therapist said to me once, one of my therapists, because I was like trying to start my speaking career, and I'm like, well, who am I? Because I am not really an expert. I just kind of know a little bit about this one thing. And she said, you never know when somebody needs to hear the thing that you have to say just the way that you say it. And I have experienced that. Like now in my speaking career, somebody will come up to me years later and be like, you have no idea how much this one thing you said. And then I'm like, what did I say? but but oftentimes it's like, "Oh, and you inspired me to do this," and, so y yeah, like, there really is room for all of us.
Yeah, there really, really is. And again, if I take this like to leadership, we all have our ways of being. So with Level Up, we have our leadership archetypes, right? We all have leadership strengths. And one leader is going to support us in seeing things from one perspective and lens, and another is going to help us see it from a different. And that's because we stack our values differently. And
Mhm.
it supports us and serves us to be able to see it all.
Yeah. Yup. Well, speaking of that, we should probably wrap up even though I could talk to you forever. So, you did a good job. You weren't too quiet.
Thanks. I'm usually not this talkative or chatty.
Ha ha ha. I told you I'd pull it out of you.
You sure did.
Well, why don't you tell people where they can find you and how do they know all the good stuff you're doing?
Absolutely. So you can find us on our website at levelup.leaders.org or on Instagram at levelupleaders. And we are happy to chat with anybody who wants to do this work around leadership and change some paradigms and shift some perspectives and put some good into the world.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I really appreciate our friendship and I
Yeah.
cannot wait to the day that we get to meet in person, which we don't know when that is yet, but it's going to happen at some point. I really treasure you and Julianne and the connection
Mm,
and it's pretty rare that when I randomly reach out to people and I'm like, "Oh, we should be friends," that I get met with the same energy that I'm giving. And it's just it was instant that, like, you guys are walking the talk alongside
mhm.
me, and I really could not be more grateful for you.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind. Yes, it's been beautiful how it unfolded. It feels like we've known each other for a lot longer than a few months. Like it feels like we've known each other for years, which
I
is really
know.
bizarre. And you're right, it is. It's special and it's magical. And I'm super grateful that this connection has happened.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing your brilliance with our audience today. It was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Using my words. Thank you so much for having me and for engaging in this conversation today.